Yes, my friend Dr. Lynn Horowitz. It's a compliment when I say his brain is on fire. The author of how many books? 25, 26? Who's counting? Many, many websites. We'll give you a couple to get started here. You can start with drlynnhorowitz.com. And don't forget 528radio.com. It's great background music. I love to have that while I'm working around the house. And good morning, Doctor.
Hi, good morning, John. It's great to be with you again.
Good to have you with us, sir. Well, we comment a lot on what's going on with Bobby Kennedy Jr. I'm generally pleased. Never really thought I would ever see the childhood vaccine reduced reduced even one, let alone down to 11. Um, and there's a lot of politics behind what's going on. He's moving I believe as fast as he feels he can. There's probably a focus group that helps Bobby Kennedy and President Trump make decisions on what to do, how quickly to move, what the effect's going to be, how to deal with the incredibly strong and powerful pharmaceutical and medical industry. There's a lot on the table to deal with, isn't there, sir?
Yeah, I'm with you, John. And I'm in agreement completely because it's exactly like you say. He's stuck between a rock and a hard place. And I don't know if you had a chance to view what I just sent you. I sent you part one of a new movie that I'm coming out with. Probably going to be a full-length feature film, if not certainly going over an hour in length. Kennedy's mentioned in it, and it really goes into start to show you the power of the censorship and the suppression and the control that deep state has over this industry, the vaccine industry. Really, for more than a quarter century, I've declared and characterized vaccinations as the sacred cow of public health that you don't mess with. It causes an instant censorship, as it has done in my case, particularly. And virtually everybody that went up against the COVID vaccines felt the same censorship I had experienced for almost 2 decades before that. So, yes, it's absolutely true. It is something that you don't want to touch if you're a politician or engaged in regulatory process, because essentially it's not just about the money. The new film that I'm coming out with shows absolutely, beyond any reasonable doubt, the main thrust is for population control. Now, that's not just controlling numbers or depopulation, that's controlling the brains, the minds of people. And on two levels, this is active in the question at hand. Why is the vaccinations the sacred cow of public health? Is because number one, you have to have the media completely in favor of the vaccinations. You can't have an anti-vaccination movement and make as much money and have as much control. And number two is that this is the new mechanism. It's the vector for the biotechnology. In fact, this is the vector, the delivery mechanism for the nano, neuro, bio, electronic technology that permits the brain cloud connection that is the essence of Project Stargate, as well as Elon Musk's the brain cloud connection in Neuralink. So there's multiple reasons why you don't mess with vaccinations. So you're absolutely right. Kennedy is stuck between a rock and a hard place. I'm proud of him, actually. I have been critical as well as supportive of Kennedy, as well we should be if we're really looking at things from an expert perspective and from a public health perspective. But you have to give him the credit for what he has been able to do. It was a hallelujah that he got the hepatitis B vaccines to be reconsidered. These were the number one most malicious and recklessly negligent and damaging vaccinations, particularly for the youth, not only because it took them years. And I don't believe anything that the pharmaceutical cartel, that Big Pharma says anymore. Nothing. You can't trust any of it, nor can you trust anything that's coming across the news media. It's all either a diversion with omissions and misrepresentations. It's basically fraud. And it's fraud because of the most powerful interest that Epstein and his cohort in crime were engaged in administering mind control. So the video that I just sent you, it's a 21-minute first part of the film that is called the Gates Epstein Cover-Up, subtitled Truth Beyond the Bullshit. And that's what it is. We're looking at complete bullshit. That's all they give us. So the question then becomes, well, how do you get to the full truth, nothing but the truth? And you are able to do that now with what has already been released, regardless of the redactions in the Epstein files. That's where I'm drawing from. I'm spending a lot of time in the Epstein files, and I'm researching things that nobody would research because they don't have the knowledge that I have. They don't ask the questions. When you do the research in the Epstein files in the government website, you have to input a search term. And the only people that would be aware of the most significant questions in vaccinology and public health is people like yours truly. I've studied it for more than a quarter century. So looking at the conspiracy reality that is happening and unfolding and has been unfolding, actually the film makes it clear that really this whole racketeering enterprise has been unfolding for more than a century. And that's where the part one goes back to. It begins to look at what were the Medici family engaged with the popes and the Vatican and usury and lending, the origin of the banking cartel that today is heavily represented by Chase Manhattan, JP Morgan Chase. And Epstein was the agent, a major agent. He served multiple purposes, and it really wasn't about the sex.
It's not about sex, idiots. It's about profitable population control.
It was about intelligence. He was an intelligence gatherer worldwide, and one can really obviously see that when one searches through the Epstein files and sees what he was actually engaged in and who he was engaged with. It's not only very, very interesting, and it begins to get into the comprehensive detail of Epstein as not only an intelligence agent for virtually all the intelligence agencies, because he was with globalization and looking at the Rockefeller manipulations and the Rothschild manipulations and their partnerships. It's obvious that this is a globalistic enterprise, and that it's obvious that the intelligence was necessary at every country on every level of finance. And so beyond the intelligence, he was a mover and shaker in putting deals together. He was introducing people, and he was being introduced by people of great significance. Part two is under development currently, where I'm going into Boris Nikolic, Bill Gates's advisor in biotechnology at Harvard and elsewhere, MIT particularly, and Stanford.
I deny and regret everything. I left my money to Nikolic to expose the racket. Screw Dr. Horowitz for exposing our population banking scheme.
And Arizona State University. Those were the hubs of the secret intelligence advancing the military, DARPA, research and developments in this field of population control via this new or relatively new nano, neuro, bio, electronic technologies that are delivered via the vaccinations. This gets into the discussion of the graphene we've had for years, you and I, looking at the potential risk of the injection of this monolayer carbon material that Charles Lieber advanced with Robert Langer lab at MIT, the Media Labs, with Joy Ito, who is the chairman virtually, or the director of the Media Labs at MIT, heavily investor. See, this is actually going into what has been in the headline news in the last 24 hours. You're looking at the Trump administration now coming forward and saying, oh, Nancy Pelosi's millions and millions of dollars has got to stop. This inside trading. Well, when you start to look at really all of the facts in the Epstein files and connections to people like Joy Ito and the president of Harvard who just resigned yesterday, that the inside trading was disgusting, despicable. Prince Andrew in England, the main reason why he's gone down is because the monarchy is in jeopardy of being grossly discredited and actually criminally indicted for massive inside trading for virtually a century. So the big business deals and the main investments in the academic institutions such as Harvard and MIT that are financed by people like Epstein's cohorts, that when they develop something, and I've said this a number of times about Oxford University, and they're intimately connected here in the organized crime and the racketeering enterprise, particularly with COVID. I made that very clear in the book, COVID Coup, The Rise of the Fourth Reich. You had the Oxford University spinning off for-profit entities. They did that with the Human Genome Project in the United States, with the National Institutes of Health, whereby for 20 years they had the United States taxpayer finance the development of the human genome, understanding all the sequences of a human's DNA and the genes. Well, they spun it off 2 weeks before it was completed. They spun it off for profit enterprises. And that's the pattern and practice. That's an important phrase. The pattern and practice in law is what's necessary to evidence a racketeering enterprise. This is a racketeering enterprise. The globalist community, the whole deep state is a racketeering enterprise. Deep state intimately connected to big pharma, big banking. This is the military, medical, petrochemical, pharmaceutical, big banking cartel. And it's a racketeering enterprise. And they play the same games over and over and over again for the programming and the securitization of their racketeering enterprise. To secure it, they have to play the same games over and over again. This is what the media is. It's reflected in that. That's why nothing that we're witnessing on television, regardless of who's outputting it, it doesn't matter whether it's left or right. It's all being played. It's all being manipulated. I just pulled up, just before this discussion, I pulled up an Epstein email to a colleague, one of his co-investors, talking about Nancy Pelosi and the Trump administration. And you would think, if you listen to the news media, Epstein hated Trump and disrespected Trump, and basically he was a major Democratic investor and supporter. Partly true. But again, in law, omissions, you're omitting something substantive and really important. The email from Epstein to a redacted high-ranking Republican Trump administration official praises Trump's progress against the Democrats, citing Nancy Pelosi and Maxine Waters as corrupt inside traders on secret governmental intelligence. The email goes into how the Trump administration is being acknowledged by Epstein for having to deal with the Democrats, all the bullshit that they were throwing at him, from the Russian collusion scams to the Green New scam, everything that Larry Fink of BlackRock was behind. If you read the book, another one of my books in the recent years has been Trump Assassins. Who really was interested and is currently interested in taking out Trump? The number one suspect is Larry Fink of BlackRock. The first shooter had been in a BlackRock advertisement as a high schooler. That's Crooks.
Right.
Crooks was in an
Right.
ad. And you go to Larry Fink and you start to look at research Larry Fink and his international dealings. What was he majorly advancing as a Democrat? Heavy financing Democrat. He was financing the woke agenda and DEI, the main issues that Trump administration has been opposing. So, you raise the issue of Kennedy. Now, in what I've just shared, you see the rock and the hard place he's stuck in. It's very, very, very difficult. And, it's despicable what the Democrats have been doing. And look at the State of the Union message. Look at them not standing for the most obviously human, decent issues that any reasonable person with any heart would basically support. These people are sick, and Trump said it straight. It's exactly the truth. These people are criminally psychopathic because they've been engaged in their, look at the Somalia issue. The representatives of this organized crime in Congress, they're yelling and shouting, at him, cursing him. For what reason? Because they're complicit in the organized crime that I'm talking about. So at any rate, there you have my lengthy response, John.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Well, Doctor, I've been using a term for, basically since we started this back in 2000, believe it or not, that the life we're living when it comes to the COVID vaccination seems like a never-ending Twilight Zone episode where there's just something new almost every week that's more horrific than the week before, isn't there?
Yeah, that's par for the course. Again, we're living in the end times. This is following the book of Revelation. And the deception that I've just mentioned is in the book of Revelation. And so everything, and again, when you think about the insanity and the hypocrisy, this is another reason why I urge everyone, including you, John, to view the new video that I just output, because it deals with MK Ultra on a historic level, on an evolutionary level. People have to understand, I mentioned this briefly to you last show. Epstein was heavily involved in musical mathematics. And in fact, the linguistics, you think of artificial intelligence that's becoming now so important. It's all about language and language processing. And we've talked about on this show how language is simply mathematics. Linguistics, the language. I was just before the show, I was reviewing Noam Chomsky, major expert, scholar in linguistics at Harvard, was heavily on the payroll of Epstein. And how they laundered the money, essentially, the payoffs, was through family members, a number of family members and a massive number of family accounts in the Chomsky family was basically laundering the payoffs, the bribes, and basically the intelligence that Chomsky, as a linguistic at Harvard. Now, again, this is all about population control and bioelectronic genetic engineering and gene therapy via mRNA vaccines. So in February 2016, Chomsky responds to Epstein about genetic altruism. That is, eugenically engineering society, as Chomsky wrote, quote, like changing the genes for dedicated savagery and lack of concern for the welfare or even security of the population on the part of that sector of educated elite that reaches positions of power, end quote. Epstein agrees and encourages investments, research, and developments therein. So when you talk about the technologies that are advancing now, as Epstein was talking about, when you start to search the files of, again, Epstein was the director, the president of a music brain institute in Florida, intertwined with Harvard and Boris Nikolic and Bill Gates. And what these guys were investing in was this technology. And there's actually scientific publications in the Epstein file that talk about that green color behind me, that talk about how this is now being used in quantum dots and quantum computing and quantum healing. 528 is the universal healing constant. And I've mentioned that in a couple scientific peer-reviewed journal articles. Epstein Files has documentation, again, talking about this green color. It's actually even shown in the scientific publications in the Epstein file. I was just mentioning the importance of 528 in terms of the linguistics. It's a frequency. So God's language is math. It never lies. 1 and 1 is always 2, unless you're a liar cheater, right? So basically, the whole concept, the antidote to Epstein's ilk, this whole criminality, this evil manipulation that's taking place from a racketeering enterprise, killing people, killing we the people, and actually converting our civilization into post-humanism. Post-humanism is called transhumanism. It is where we're advancing now robotics and integrating the human being and consciousness with AI and robotics. Sadly and sickly, most of us have been turned into genetically modified organisms. Why? Because all of the stupid people who took the vaccinations, which included the spike protein antigens that they shed and spread, so that all of us have now, including myself, received the spike protein antigen, even if I didn't get vaccinated, and that contains the bioelectronic bioweapon. That was the advanced function bioweapon. And so what does that do? It alters the DNA. It alters the function of the DNA. So you started the show talking about Kennedy and what, the problems that now we're facing all the time, increasing with the vaccinations that have been spread already. It's part of what actually Noam Chomsky in the Epstein mail was discussing with Epstein and being paid a lot of money to present his scientific expertise on population control, depopulation, including particularly. They were engaged in discussions about all the, quote, poor people of the world. How Bill Gates has been saying we're going to use vaccinations to reduce 15% of the world's population. How do they do that? Through the vaccinations that they've been spreading. Now you integrate Boris Nikolic, the advisor to Bill Gates and the co-investor in the financial realm with Bill Gates, and Epstein at Harvard. And you look at Chomsky at Harvard. You look at Charles Lieber developing this technology at Harvard, intimately connected with Pfizer, as well as Moderna and the mRNA vaccinations that are the delivery devices for not just the biological genetically engineering technology, but also for this concept of the electronics, the bioelectronics, the biophysics of quantum computing, quantum technology, Project Stargate, that the Trump administration with Larry Ellison has heralded as the greatest thing that's going to be engaged in advancing health science and healthcare. Inject yourself with the mRNA vaccine, says Larry Ellison of Oracle. Who's Oracle? Oracle, major CIA contractor from the get-go. Major data mining. Look at Peter Thiel with Palantir Corporation, the military's #1 data mining organization. Data mining not just over the internet, data mining in your body in real time. Data mining, the bioelectronics of what's happening to your DNA for the brain-cloud connection, for taking your blood and making your blood be a communication technology for population control. And it's heralded, okay, here's where the omissions and misrepresentations are. This is where I leave you, we the people, to realize we've got a problem in the Trump administration. Even though Kennedy's doing relatively good, stuck between a rock and a hard place, the problem is that as this advances in such as programs such as Project Stargate, where they inject you with the mRNA vaccinations that permit what's actually in the scientific realm, it's called diagnostotherapeutics, where you have one system, such as what I'm talking about, be engaged in diagnosing cancers. This is Larry Ellison's speech at the press conference he gave for the Trump administration.
8 hours. This is the promise of AI and the promise of the future.
From Oracle, CIA operation. From the beginning, he says we're going to diagnose the pieces of cancer that's in your body, and then within 24 hours, where artificial intelligence is going to create a vaccine specific for you. That's the promise, the promised software that they were talking about 30 years ago. The counterintelligence and agents that provocateurs in population control that I was actually having to deal with 20, 30 years ago. Ted Gunderson and his ilk were all associating FBI, CIA covert operations, searching and developing this whole concept of computerization for control of the population. Initially, it was called the Promise software. Now it's called Project Stargate. And so now you have the capacity, says Larry Ellison of Oracle, to develop this technology. And when Epstein's now investing in the corporations with Bill Gates yesterday in the news comes out and says, okay, I finally admit it. Yeah, I was having sex with a couple Russian hookers, and Epstein fixed me up, and I'm embarrassed, and I apologize to all the people who support me. Hogwash, bullshit. What he was really doing was he was investing in these companies that were developing these advanced population control technologies. And it goes back to not only the profiteering I mentioned, and not only the mind control and population control operation, but the securitization. National security is primarily associated for corporate securitization. And this goes back to the early history. Look at where did eugenics, racial hygiene, come from? It came out of Cold Spring Harbor Labs. It came out of the partnership between the Carnegies, the Vanderbilts, and the Rockefellers, and the Fords.
I do not accept competition in any industry. I ship John Zoyle and advanced eugenics and racial hygiene with him at Cold Spring Harbor in New York.
Because they were afraid that the immigrants coming into the country and then forming labor unions were going to upset the status quo and eliminate the corporation heads. This is not just about communism or socialism, because the globalists play both sides. And that's what's very clear in the Epstein files. Again, I mentioned Nancy Pelosi, the whole inside training scandal and scam. Epstein is talking about that in the Epstein files, how the Trump administration, the Democrats versus Republicans politically are playing out. Actually, he supports Trump. You wouldn't believe it, but it's true. He says the way that the Democrats have dealt with Trump, particularly on this issue of population control and inside trading, is that they've left him like in a football game on the 10-yard line, and he's actually been moving the ball. But he's moving the ball against a huge defense. That's deep state. That's Central Intelligence Agency. That's why we haven't seen indictments of Brennan and Clapper. We haven't seen them because you've got Pam Bondi and Kash Patel overwhelmed.
I am not allowed to release all the Epstein files, nor prosecute the guilty in the CIA, FBI, and Congress.
Our hands are tied by unfathomable deep state corruption that has destroyed all semblance of justice.
Overwhelmed. They've got setups in the Justice Department and the corrupt judges. Massive corruption in the Justice Department and across the board, all across the United States in the courts. Total corruption, total control, financial control. Stemming from who? Stemming from where? Not Elon Musk. I assure you, he's too young. His $1 trillion net worth is a pittance compared to the Rockefeller Rothschild cartel that have been dealing with billions and billions invested over how many years? A century. So now you begin to really dig deep into the deep state. And this is where you come to the answer to the question, what's the value of 528? And it's the antidote. It's in the Bible. Go to Isaiah 22:22 and Revelation 3:6-8. What I'm telling you is the key of the house of David that opens doors that no man can open. Quantum technology, God's creative technology, musical mathematics, opens doors that no man can open, closes doors that no man can close. We're dealing spiritual metaphysics, biophysics. You get into this realm now of the highest level of consciousness. That is God consciousness. That's musical mathematics. Our brains, you call my brain a guy with a brain on fire. Well, nothing compared to what God's technology and God's brain is really doing at this time. Administering everything. With Jesus coming to you, coming to us upon heartfelt, loving, faithful prayer and a positive, loving intention to heal. This is the technology for healing. That's why it's the antidote to all the manipulations and the poisonings and the intoxication that's being delivered via vaccination. It is the antidote, what we're talking about. In medicine, you have to diagnose before you can treat anything. Diagnose, what does it mean? It means to see through to the root of the disorder. The root of this disorder is criminal psychopathology manipulating the global population, poisoning us for profit, as well as politics, as well as the ideology that we have too many useless eaters on the planet, the poor people. This is the discussion that Epstein is having with Noam Chomsky and others, and Bill Gates.